Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Edison International in Southern California, Edison. It's great to be here this morning to talk about what California is doing, both to mitigate and adapt to climate change. We're live from the Pathways to 1.5 Pavilion, and just want to thank the Climate Registry for hosting us this morning. You know, this is my 4th COP, and every COP is different. I do sense, and maybe you do as well, a sense of urgency to actually get things done, you know, to a real recognition that we are in this decisive decade, 3 years into a decisive decade, and it's time to really ramp up the energy transition. So oftentimes, as California goes, so goes the country, and certainly as the world's 5th largest economy, California serves as a global role model. So I'm very excited to have 2 leaders from California here with me today. And let me introduce the speaker. So David Hochschild, to my left, is the chair of the California Energy Commission. We both serve on the board of a small but mighty nonprofit called Veloz that has helped to advance electric vehicle adoption in California and is looking to expand now beyond California. And to my further left is Pedro Pizarro, the president and CEO of Edison International, and coincidentally my boss, so hopefully not going to screw this up. So let me start first with you, Chair Hochschild. How do you see the California Energy Commission's international engagement here at COP28 and elsewhere truly supporting the state's work on decarbonization?
Yeah, well, so first of all, thank you, Edison and Caroline and Pedro, for your incredible leadership in decarbonizing the grid, really showing the way towards not just getting to 100% clean energy grid, but electrifying almost everything, which is the future we're all trying to build together. So in California, I think we are a postcard from the future in terms of what we're building today. We are getting about 60% of our electricity today from clean carbon-free sources of energy, en route to 100%. We have grown our new vehicle sales from being 5% electric when Governor Newsom took office to 27% electric today, and are now the first state in the country where the best-selling vehicle is an electric car, and are on track to be the first state in the country to get the majority of our vehicle sales from electric. And so the future we're building really is going to flow principally through wires and not pipes. And so we have a couple things we got to do. We have to make the grid clean, we got to make it reliable, and we got to keep it affordable. And that 3-legged stool is kind of, I'd say, the foundation on which all of our policy rests. The good news is that in addition to a massive increase in the investment the state is making, and just as an example, the Energy Commission, which I chair, we have about 700 people. When I started as chair, our budget was about $1 billion. Now we're at $10 billion. So huge increase in commitment for all the things we need to do, storage and EV charging infrastructure and so forth. We're now, for the first time in a long time, we have truly robust, bold, visionary federal support and 10-year tax credits for solar, for wind, for geothermal, for electric heat pumps, for energy storage, and so forth. And we're really the single biggest beneficiary of those tax credits. So we are taking these things to scale. And I would just point out one thing. When we really started aggressively, 10, 15 years ago, moving towards a decarbonized future, we heard a lot of criticism that this would be terrible for our economy. I heard that again and again and again. So what has happened? Over the last decade, we have passed Russia, Italy, Brazil, France, and the UK. We're now the 5th largest economy in the world, perched to soon be the 4th. And I think it's a real example that you can do this in a way that supports robust economic growth. So I think it's a really important thing we can do is just dispel the mythology out there and showcase that it's a bad bet to bet against innovation. Betting with the technologies of the future is good for your economy. And so that's what a lot of our international engagement has been. We've been meeting with China, with India. I met with Minister Xie, China's climate envoy, yesterday, and doing a bunch of bilateral meetings while we're here. So anyway, good to be here. Thank you for hosting.
Well, that's great. Well, Pedro, as Chair Hochschild just mentioned, the future is electric, not through wires, not pipes. Edison International just recently did an updated analysis, pathway to 2045, countdown to 2045. which updated its analysis of the pathway for California to achieve its carbon neutrality goal. So why don't you talk about that and what it's going to take to have California get to carbon neutrality?
Absolutely, and thanks, Caroline and David. Thank you for your leadership. And I do want to correct Caroline. The whole boss thing, it usually goes in this direction. I get bossed around a lot. So, absolutely, California, as David said, Chair Hochschild said, has been on a great path, and it's done a lot. But part of the countdown to 2045 messages, we ain't done. We have to roll up our sleeves, which we've done here literally this morning, because there's a lot of work to do. So what the analysis showed was that the California economy can get to net zero affordably and reliably by 2045. This is economy-wide, but it's a big lift across the entire economy, right? And significant infrastructure investment that needs to take place. On the electrification side, to put some numbers behind it, we see the state of California's total electric load going up by 80% between now and 2045, so almost double. By the way, that number, when we did our pathway analysis in 2019, was only 60%. So we're seeing an even greater need to electrify. How do we get there? Well, it means a lot of investment in clean resources, renewables, storage. We see a tripling of the renewables that are on the grid versus today. We need a lot of grid for that, right, to be able to move the resources around the economy. And then all the clean electricity needs to get used in the economy to displace fossil fuels. So we see, give you a couple, sound bites, 90% of passenger vehicles being electric by 2045, 95% of buildings having electric space and water heating by 2045. There's some parts of the economy that are harder to electrify, like long-haul, heavy-duty transportation, high thermal input industrial processes. And so for those, we will need alternatives like clean hydrogen. We still see some need for fossil fuels. Fossil fuels don't go away as we try and find the economically optimal way to get there. So therefore, we'll need carbon capture, whether it's direct air capture or carbon capture and sequestration, to manage that remaining fossil fuel load. So put it all together, it's ambitious, it's still doable. I'll say there's a lot of technology investment that's needed, which is why we really appreciate the partnership and, frankly, the leadership that the California Energy Commission provides, with that going from $1 billion to $10 billion. You're funding a lot of important investment across the economy and in new technologies. We think that something like 15% of generation in 2045 will be coming from resources that just aren't around today. Offshore wind, which really has not been deployed at scale, and certainly in the kind of environment we have in California, where we need floating turbines for deep waters. Small modular reactors, still illegal to build new nuclear in California, but I think the conversation starting about, does California need to access those resources in the future? New geothermal. So new technologies that will be needed to get us there. Again, we can get there. Big investment. We'll put pressure on our customers' bills. They will be using more electricity, so the bills will be higher from that too. But I'll finish with the punchline that it is something that has an economic co-benefit, because since electric technologies are so much more efficient than fossil fuel fired, we see our average customer spending more on electricity in 2045, but spending 40% less in real terms on their total energy bill, electric plus gasoline plus gas, than they do today. That's a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Well, with the permission of your boss, Caroline, I would like to just build on what you just said. I think a good way to think about what we're doing, it's actually like raising a family, okay? And solar and wind have graduated high school, graduated college, they're off into the world, right? I think electric vehicles are entering high school now. Energy storage a little bit behind, electric heat pumps still behind that. And then we have some exciting, very promising young students, maybe in first, second grade, but they're
some diapers.
Coming. Yeah, exactly. And I just want to share a little bit about those technologies. So I would put long duration energy storage in that category. We have a big vote on the 13th next week at the Energy Commission. We're going to be approving the largest long duration storage project we've done. We did one for 20 megawatt hours, one for 50 megawatt hours. This one will be for 500 megawatt hours. This is Form Energy. It's an iron air technology, super promising, very low cost, 100-hour life cycle. So it is really something that will add a lot of resilience to the grid. And we're the incubator for these. And the same goes for offshore wind, where we're going to be the largest market in the world for floating offshore wind. And these turbines, just to provide a little bit of context, one rotation of the blade powers 2 houses for a day. The swept area is 10 football fields. And the turbine size on land, typically when you drive around the United States or elsewhere in Europe, you're looking at 1.5 to 2 megawatt turbines. They're now doing a 22 megawatt offshore wind turbine. So the scale is off the charts. And the generation profile is really complementary to solar. And so we're investing in that. And those are really, I think, a big part of the future we're building together. On top of, just deployment of the stuff we know that already works, terrestrial solar and wind and energy storage. And I'll just close with this. This is one of the energy storage piece is huge. To the best of my knowledge, you guys have installed more energy storage in SCE territory than any other utility in the world. And by the end of this month, okay, we're going to hit statewide 8,700 megawatts of energy storage. That's up from 250 megawatts in 2019. So it's a 3,500% growth rate, equivalent to 2 Diablo Canyon nuclear plants a year for the last 4 years. And it has kept the lights on. Without energy storage, because of the duress the grid's under, we would have been in much worse shape. And it's working. The fleet has been really reliable. So I just want to pay tribute to Edison for your early leadership on that. That's a critical piece of the puzzle as well.
Can I just, sorry, you lost control here, Caroline. We'll give it back to you in a second.
Trying to tie into the energy system.
Yeah, well, just the diapers versus high school point. You're absolutely right. I think you gave great examples on the resource side. Just really quickly on the end use side, just as important a concept. The paper that we put out before Glasgow 2 years ago at Mind the Gap, that took a look at the state's interim target of 2030 and the gap that we saw in getting there. And as of 2 years ago, the state would have needed to quadruple its reductions rate in order to make it to 2030. We haven't quadrupled yet, so we got some work to do. But back then, if you look at transportation electrification, vehicles contribute about 50% of California's greenhouse gas emissions when you include refining and all of that. And we saw vehicles needing to address about a third of that gap between business as usual and what we need to get to in 2030. So, significant, but less than their proportion of emissions. Buildings contribute about 10% of emissions today, but we saw them needing to address something like a quarter of the gap. So I'd say the building electrification piece here is one that really needs support because it is where solar was 15 years ago.
That's exactly right.
Well, and so just building on that, right? We, in this comp, I see a lot around delivering, right? So unite, act, deliver, from promises to progress. And so talk a bit about, even though we're doing so many good things in California, to your point, Pedro, we still see a gap between today and what needs to be done to achieve both the 2030 foundational target of 40% below 1990 emission levels, hitting to 2045 and the 80% below in carbon neutrality. So this implementation crisis that's being mentioned so much here at this COP, can you talk about what California can be doing to address that? And I'd like to hear from both of you on that.
Sure, maybe I'll start real quickly in this one. I gave you some of the numbers earlier around just to scale, right? 90% of vehicles, 95% of buildings, et cetera, 80% load growth. What I didn't say is just how hard it is going to be to get from here to there. Still doable, but we need a lot of help. And to me, the best example is on the grid side. So if you take a look at the investment requirement, we estimate that California will need to invest around $370 billion across renewables, bulk power renewables, storage, and the grid interconnected. And the grid part of that we think is around $125 billion between now and 2045. That translates though into this comparison. If you think about the rate at which we collectively, all the utilities in the state, have added transmission resources over the last decade or two, that rate of transmission additions annually will need to quadruple between now and 2045 in order to have enough wire to connect that 80% increase in load. If you think about the distribution wires, the lower voltage wires, that rate of additions will need to go up by 10x compared to where we've been in the last decade. That's really tough because, frankly, above everything, you have supply chain issues, you have to building the labor force. I think we can manage all that piece. To me, the most intractable part is siting and permitting. It just takes too long. It's about 5 years right now for that piece of the cycle. The total cycle for transmission can be 10 to 12 years. And so if you gave me a magic wand to fix one thing, it'd be that one.
Yeah, totally with you. I've been saying for the last year or so, with the period that we're in now, I'm just calling the great implementation. We actually don't need new landmark policy goals. We have 100% in place for vehicles, 100% in place for the grid. All these targets, 6 million heat pump goal for the state of California by 2030, and go down the list. But what we have to do is speed deployment. I will highlight one sort of small but important success story on the distributed generation side of that. We recently pushed out $20 million of grant money to 300 different cities and counties around the state to do what's called Solar App, which is basically a fast-track online permitting for storage and for rooftop solar. In many cases, the permit time can be up to 60 days, and this is now turning it into a one-day online experience and making that process much more friction-free. And we got to find ways to do that in every way we can for larger scale projects as well. So, because we can definitely do better. And I would just say, we get really excited, rightfully so, about technology innovation, where we've had a lot of progress, but process innovation, permit innovation is even more exciting to me these days.
And I think at a national level, we've had some success. For example, in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, there were some modest reforms to the NEPA process. I'm chair of EEI, right? So we're very engaged in that. But we need a lot more help at federal levels and certainly at the state and local levels.
Well, and speaking of that, so California, to many, has an alphabet soup of agencies: the CEC, the CPUC, the CARB, and so CAISO, and all these different agencies that have elements of both the environment and energy. Can you talk a bit, and then the local agencies and the entities that have permitting and siting requirements at the local level? How can we improve that coordination across agencies? And I know that's already happening to some degree within the key agencies in California, as well as that coordination at that local level.
Yeah, so I think nobody designing the architecture of energy agencies from scratch would kind of put together the mosaic we have today. But on the other hand, trying to reform it is extremely difficult and can actually be a big distraction. That Schwarzenegger tried that some time ago. So I do think the coordination is, we're doing as best we can. But just to fly over quickly the responsibilities. The Energy Commission does, energy policy and planning for the state. We oversee the renewable portfolio standard enforcement for the 43 publicly owned utilities. We give out, most of the state's grant and incentive program funding for different clean energy technologies, and we deploy, we're doing $4 billion for EV charging, the $330 million for long duration storage, and so forth, as well as setting the codes and standards for new construction. The PUC oversees directly the investor-owned utilities, helps, sets rates and so forth. The CAISO oversees the grid, and the CARB, the Air Resources Board, is kind of the overarching air quality and climate agency. So we're in constant touch together and try to move the agenda forward. I will say, the governor at this point has gotten his appointees in place in leadership at really every major agency, and I think we're all aligned on the larger goal. So that makes it simpler. So we're really in a period of like, all right, how do we do this, and not whether to do it, and that's a good thing.
I think that captures it really well. Maybe I'll be a little pointed here and say that there is a lot of good setting of the stage for reform, but we really do need reform. And the fact that a transmission project today can take 10 to 12 years to get developed, we simply cannot get to net zero at that pace. And so as we look forward, The fact that the governor has, set up this task force that's going to be taking a look at ideas for how to better streamline the process, that's really encouraging. We're, going to be very engaged in that. I'll give you, some simple, quote unquote, items. Think about the fact that, as you said, the Cal ISO is responsible for looking at the transmission needs across its system. But then we take that analysis, and in order to go get a certificate for public convenience and necessity, the CPUC, that opens up that analysis all over again, right? And there's a balance here because we do need to make sure there's appropriate engagement for the public interest. On the other hand, it's very easy for anybody to basically put sand in the gears and stop the process. And so finding a way to still respect the need for process, still respect the need to have public voice and engagement, yet move, because we're running out of time. And if we continue with this process where a project can get halted by, a group putting in 3 different alternatives that are really not going to make much sense, but are going to add another 2 or 3 years to, the project development, we're not going to make it to net zero.
I'll just compliment also the CEC. Your integrated energy plan is sort of the beginning of the process. It feeds into the Public Utilities Commission and the procurement that the utilities have to do. And so your updated analysis would show the need for more resources has driven, therefore, the procurement by utilities for more clean energy as well as the energy storage that you talked about. That is fed into the Independent System Operator, the CAISO transmission plan. And so you see now a significant escalation in transmission need in the state of California over the next 10 years. And so it is a better coordination, a singular view of what is necessary. And I compliment the CEC for the beginning of that process, because that integrated energy plan is what really feeds into these other proceedings that are really key to California achieving its goals. Well, let's look ahead and be optimistic that California is going to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. How does that look in California? What is different or not different about California in 2045 once we've achieved that goal?
Well, as I said, I think electrification, we have to get as excited about electrification as we've been about renewables. And that term needs to be socialized. It needs to be the mission of everything we do, because I will just share, one of the things that the Energy Commission operates is the EPIC program, which is our landmark R&D program. I believe it's the best R&D program in the world, and I really am incredibly proud of the team that's working on that. We fund, as part of that, a suite of next-generation battery technologies: Cuberg, Sepion, Core Shell, Blue Current, Sparks, a whole bunch of others. I can just tell you firsthand from visiting with these companies, what is coming in battery technology is going to change the game. The energy density improvements we're looking at, cost reduction, safety improvement, the significance of that is that it radically expands the envelope of possibility for electrification. Okay, we have not traditionally been talking about long-range trucking, being an electric thing. There's already operating in California today. The Tesla vehicles out of the Modesto Pepsi plant are doing 520-mile routes. And that's going to get even longer and better, as well as all the other things that high energy density batteries can enable. It really is an accelerant for electrification. And if we're smart about it, with vehicle to grid and intelligent demand response programs, it's a great source of support and reliability and cost reduction for the grid itself. So I think at the heart of the future we're trying to build is not just a clean electric grid, but a heavily electrified state, and where end uses that are now principally supported by natural gas, for example, will transition. And backing all of that up is one of the visions I'm most excited about that we're investing in is a vision called Lithium Valley. We have a massive lithium reserve in California. We've been investing in lithium recovery technology. There's enough lithium in the state of California to supply batteries for more than one electric vehicle for every citizen of the United States. 375 million EVs worth of lithium just in Salton Sea, and it's the greenest way to produce lithium in the world. So you produce 20,000 tons of lithium. If you do that through hard rock mining in Australia and China, it impacts 3,000 acres. If you do it through evaporation ponds in South America, you impact 30,000 acres. If you do it through Salton Sea in California, you impact 30 acres. So very, very light footprint, and of course, 100% powered by geothermal. So lithium will be the oil of the clean energy future. We want to produce that sustainably, and then we want to be seeing that flow into all kinds of batteries to support electrification.
Pedro, you think about anything that you see as different in 2045 with carbon neutrality in California?
Well, I mean, a lot is different, right? Given what we talked about in terms of the need, the investment need. From a consumer perspective, it's going to make for a very different experience in our economy, right? It's not just about the electrification piece, but it's also those co-benefits I was mentioning, right? The economic co-benefits, the air quality co-benefits. We all remember how amazing it was during the awful, period of the pandemic, but the amazing part was how clear the sky was. Well, that's how it's going to be when you have, all vehicles being electric, or most of them. So, the impact on our communities will be significant. And this also then talks about how we make sure that this is an equitable transition. Because we need to make sure that these benefits are going everywhere across our communities, not just for those of us who can today, afford our heat pump, more easily. So that's where having the programs, the incentives to make sure that this transition is one that's bringing everyone along. When you think about the federal level, right, the IRA, my favorite part of the IRA is the $4,000 used electric vehicle tax credit, which Edison pushed really hard for in Washington. It's patterned after what we have in California. So that means that the electric vehicles are not just about well-heeled folks who can buy a big expensive new EV, but it's about folks who are in a disadvantaged community who can get into a second or third hand, smaller electric vehicle. We need to complement that, and we're doing that with programs like Southern California Edison's Charge Ready program, where we're helping to get something like 30,000 chargers installed. Something like half of that program, $436 million program, is targeted towards low-income and disadvantaged communities. So, back to your question, so what's different? It's not only the high-level stuff we talked about, but the quality of life, the experience of our population is radically different at all levels of our society. And the final thing I'll say is that that will, maybe this is not different, but will be more of, it will reinforce the view of California being a strong model for how you do this in other economies. That's just so important, right? And I've already seen the impact of that. Frankly, that things we do have impacted how the discussion has gone at the national level. I see it in the discussions with my peers at EEI. We see it also through our non-utility subsidiary, Edison Energy. We have around 500 folks who are providing advisory services to large corporate and industrial clients around the globe. Very large European presence, for example. And so, we're seeing large corporates that themselves have strong commitments to sustainability. They need help. I think they're drawing from some of the lessons that we have in California, and helping to drive action, subnational action, whether it's in other states in the U.S. or broadly around the globe. It's exciting.
Yeah, I think from a personal, individual perspective, it's going to be quite different. And just even, I've said this before, just in terms of smell and sound, because it's going to be so much more quiet in an electric environment in our communities. And the smell, right? So the exhaust running behind a bus or sitting in a school bus is going to be just so different, because it's going to be an electric experience and there's going to be no smell. It's going to be this quiet, lovely experience getting to school or running behind a bus if you're in an urban environment and in our urban communities, to your point. So I think it's going to be quite different.
Can I share a story on that? I did a trip, a very inspiring trip in June of this year for offshore wind to Norway. We had a delegation of about 7 states that are all doing offshore wind. We're going to spend a week there. Norway just installed the largest floating offshore wind project in the world. So they're getting 90% of their vehicles today from electric. Okay, so you go to downtown Oslo, one of the main things I was struck by is just, to your point, it's quiet. And there's actually a reduction in noise pollution had a really big impact on me. You just realize what it's like, I mean, how much ambient noise we just kind of take for granted. And then also things like ferries. So Norway has electrified 53, these are not little ferries, these are like full-size commercial ferries. It takes 7 minutes to disembark all the passengers and then for the next group to get on. And in that 7 minutes, the ferry fully recharges and then can go off for another 2 hours. And again, you're on the ferry, it's quiet and there's no pollution. And people love it. And so it just felt like going 15 years in the future. And we're going to make that happen. We have to make that happen. And that vision really keeps me going. Yeah.
Audience questions, yes.
Can I take? All right. There we go. Thanks. Hi, I'm Hendrik Rosenthal from CLP Holdings in Hong Kong, an electric utility based there. And I fully agree what you have put together for California is visionary. And it is really, this 2045 goal is exceptional in terms of that bigger system transformation that has to happen. From our perspective, what we usually talk about in Hong Kong is we need to decarbonize the grid. We need to get rid of coal, and we need to phase out all the fossils in our generation system. But no one's put the numbers together in terms of what else needs to happen from the customer side and the whole transport element that you mentioned. Needless to say, though, I have solar panels on my roof. I drive electric. I could never go back. It is quiet and it drives beautifully. But there is that sort of, it's quite a difficult jump to make in terms of the whole system transformation. And you've talked about structural challenges, so quite fascinating to see how that will evolve. But just anecdotally, though, having been recently in LA and Southern California, my brother lives down in San Diego, just in March of this year, and he doesn't have an electric car. He bought a plug-in hybrid. Like, why did you do that? He doesn't have solar panels on his roof. He has not taken on board any of these transformative elements as a customer. And I was just shocked and sort of actually really annoyed with him. What are you doing? You live in California. And I know this company, Edison International, Southern California Edison, is really doing all this great work. And I know this is not your jurisdiction, it's not your territory, but why is this not happening in your turf? I mean, I do better in Hong Kong. And the simple answer was, A, it's expensive, and B, I don't trust the system. As in, the grid will collapse if everyone will do this. This sort of like mindset. I'm like, what are you talking about? This can't be true.
Maybe I can react to it, and thanks for sharing the experience, and glad you got to visit. I don't know if your brother will watch the webcast and know that how annoyed you made him, but or he made you.
I'll play the recording.
Yeah, maybe it's mutual. I don't know. Yeah. A couple of thoughts. First, let me start with the last point around, if everybody does this, can the grid handle it? So yes, right? And one of the benefits of this industry is that we do think long term. This is something that, not only in California, but with my EEI hat on, we are all focused on this, and we are all seeing unprecedented growth after a period that, where load growth was said, not that significant. In California, it's being driven by electrification, by vehicles, principally. I think buildings will be more of a factor. In other states, we're seeing significant load growth coming from data centers, right? We think about AI and just the farms of graphics cards to be able to drive that computation need. That's driving significant load in a number of jurisdictions. So we're all dealing with this. We're all facing supply chain challenges. So, the lead times on transformers are a lot longer today than they were, 3 years ago. But as an industry, we're working together, and we're working closely with the federal government to help address some of the things like the supply chain challenges. But importantly, we do have time, right? And so as we think about our planning processes at our Edison utility, there's a lot of focus right now on how do we make sure that we get earlier interaction with the customer, particularly large customers. If you have a fleet operator who's going to electrify a set of trucks, that's a lot of load landing in one little spot of our territory. So the earlier we can find that out, right, then the better able we'll be to serve that. New equipment that will help with that. In SCE's current general rate case, part of the application there is seeking support for funding mobile equipment, mobile batteries, mobile transformation equipment that can be used as a Band-Aid on a substation that's all of a sudden getting overloaded with new load. Might take us a couple of years to get the siting and the permitting or the permits for expanding the substation, but at least we can put some of this temporary technology in place to bridge the gap, right? So a number of ways that we're making sure that ultimately, yes, we can deliver on this growth. So your first part of your question, why isn't everybody doing it? I think California has had a significant history of incentives and subsidies and support for new technologies. To be very candid with you, we're in a period now where it's important for California, in our view, to start taking precious dollars and shifting them to the technologies that need the most help. So for example, you've seen probably a lot of press about net energy metering and the changes to that in California. You have to remember that that's not an investor thing, right? Our investors don't make any money either way, if we sell more or less electricity. Net energy metering has been paid for by non-solar customers to support customers who are going solar. Important tool. It's been very effective. Since it was established, the price of solar has gone down by about a factor of 7. It's about 1/7 what it used to be. So the incentives work. They sent a demand signal out to the suppliers who were able to climb down the cost curve and now produce a product that can better stand on its own 2 feet. Now we need to take those incentives and deploy them more heavily towards electric vehicles, towards storage, towards heat pumps, right? Heat pumps are where solar panels were 15 years ago. And so why are more customers not doing this yet? We just went through installing, electrifying our entire house. It's still a little expensive, right? Southern California Edison has a proposal in front of the Public Utilities Commission for a nearly $700 million project or program to help deploy 250,000 heat pumps. And has a cost-benefit ratio of about 1. So what it's really going to do is help ease the transition for a set of customers. So I think about 40% of that program targeted towards low-income customers. But importantly, that'll send a demand signal to the suppliers to get it going. Final answer to your question around why are more customers not doing this. Think about electric vehicles. A lower cost electric vehicle today, especially when you add on the federal and state incentives, over the life of that vehicle has a lower total cost of ownership than an internal combustion engine vehicle. But I think the typical customer is thinking about upfront cost, not total cost of ownership. So we need to help them with the math, but we also need to continue programs like the support in the IRA, the support that the state has provided to help to continue ease that transition until all the exciting work going on batteries brings down that upfront cost to parity.
Well, let me supply you, in addition to that, with some good ammunition as you apply great peer pressure to your brother. We have in the state of California now 94,000 electric vehicle chargers. That's more than we have gasoline nozzles. We have 58,000 gasoline nozzles. Now, most of the EV charging we have is level 2, so it's not super fast, but we do have 10,000 fast chargers, and our goal is to get to 1 million EV chargers for the state. So my agency alone, we're putting $4 billion into that infrastructure. So availability of charging is growing. And the quality of electric vehicles, the range of electric vehicles is increasing. There is now a tax credit for the electric vehicles. And the driving experience is so much better. The cost to charge, it's about half the cost per mile to drive electric as it is to drive gasoline. And of course, there's 90% fewer components in an electric vehicle, so many fewer things to fail. I've been driving an electric car for almost 6 years. The number of mechanical problems I've had is 0. I mean, they work great. And I think the driving experience has been really successful. And I do think, actually, that's the future. I think electric vehicles are going to win. I think the markets are showing that. I mean, the valuation of the car companies is basically ordered by who's furthest along in electrification, if you look at how it's kind of stacked. But we got to get folks to adopt these technologies, and it takes time to change the culture. But I think we're on actually a pretty good path. I think, again, we were at 5% of new vehicle sales being electric 6 years ago. We're at 27% now, and your brother can help be part of the change. So good luck.
Well, I think every time I hear about the California experience, and you're such a great cheerleader for what California is doing and what we've already accomplished, and the public-private partnership and commitment towards that clean energy future really is demonstrated when I hear the two of you. It just was very energizing and inspiring. So please join me in thanking both Chair Hochschild and Pedro for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.